What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. So getting into Armor Hunters, again, it's been been a few weeks or so since we covered some Valiant Comics stuff, and I feel like Robert Venditti is doing an amazing job with regards, to this Exo Manowar story, or really kind of like the Valiant Comics story, because this involves quite a few characters, but Armor Hunters is stellar in terms of how it unfolds and what it all involves. And the reason why is because of the fact that up until this point in the Exo Manowar storytelling, most of the emphasis has been on Eric of Dacia in terms of how he functions on Earth, which is to say, the fact that he's basically time displaced. Again, for those of you guys who are just kind of catching up, he was a guy who was essentially kidnapped from the 5th century, kept as a slave aboard an alien ship, and then, finally managed to escape by capturing the Exo Manowar armor to arrive on Earth, only to find out that because of how fast the ship was traveling, 2,000 years had basically passed on Earth in terms of him only, aging by 10 years, 15 years, something like that, simply because of the fact that the ship was traveling faster than light. And so because of that, arriving back on Earth meant that he was basically time displaced. Along with the XO armor, he was trying to restore his own society, the Visigoths, and he had really just kind of been struggling ever since. Now, of course, with some of the more modern stories that we've seen, or really some of the more recent stories, he's kind of been stepping into the realm of understanding that the world is vastly different than the one that he's used to, and that he basically can't just restore the Visigoth territory because that territory of the world doesn't exist anymore. What used to be Rome is now partially Rome and a whole bunch of other countries that have formed their own governments and so on and so forth. And so it's not as simple as just kind of walking into somebody's backyard, planting a flag and saying, I claim this land in the name of the Visigoths. It doesn't work that way anymore. And so it's been kind of cool to see his character evolve and his character grow, but not a lot of credence has been given to the Exo suit of armor, only insofar that it's basically just kind of like a suit that allows him to achieve incredible feats. And that's really been about it. The cool thing about Armor Hunters is that it gives us this entirely different perspective about the suit. And that's kind of cool because the suit has largely been ambiguous. The only thing we knew about it was that the suit was basically held by the Vine race, and the Vine worshipped it. But what really kind of goes on here is this idea that the Vine didn't even really know what it was about. Their belief system regarding the suit was as much legend as it was just kind of filling in the holes of questions they didn't have the answer to. And so again, with regards to Armor Hunters, we basically pick up with the hunters themselves arriving on Earth. And the reason why is because of the fact that the Armor Hunters are essentially an extraterrestrial race of quite literally XO armor hunters. What we'll find out in this story, again, there's a lot that goes into the nature of the armor themselves, but Malcolm, the guy that we saw basically in Prelude to Armor Hunters, he was actually a member of the Armor Hunters themselves. The issue with this is that he was actually infected by the armor, by the Exo suit, and the result was that he was basically cast out, considered a pariah by the Armor Hunters, and they in turn went after him. Now again, we'll find out why here in a minute, but the way that the Armor Hunters are formed is really more of a benefit in terms of how their team makeup is formed, what roles they play, so on and so forth. And so you basically have their tech guy, or their tech thing, more or less, which comes in the form of Helix. And Helix is basically just like pure data energy, kind of a given physical form, which kind of allows Helix to jump in and out of computer systems and so on and so forth, and invade normal human hosts and kind of corrupt their biological structure and so on. But the entire basis behind them being here is to essentially find the Exo suit itself. Now, of course, what this shows us is that they are tracking the suits by way of some kind of signal that's left behind by the suit itself, essentially following breadcrumbs. And because of the fact that Exo Manowar, because of the fact that he'd been in different territories around the world, these individuals are tracking down the various locations that Eric has been in order to find him and then eliminate him, take the suit for themselves. Now, of course, what we also end up finding out is that the Russians are basically trying to duplicate the Exo suit of armor. And this is very alarming to the Armor Hunters. And the reason why is because of the fact that, reporting back to the guy who's basically running the show, Primary Rebo, what we end up finding out here is that the suit itself, as far as they're concerned, is effectively sentient in the sense that the suit basically goes around and it takes over a host. Now, again, this is really kind of ironic because we never really viewed it that way. We just kind of viewed it as just a suit that a person was able to wear, and that was really it. Not only that, up until this point, we only ever thought there was one exosuit. What Malcolm showed us is that there's more than one. There are multiple exosuits, and each one basically carries out its own role and its own fulfillment. Now, of course, switching over to Eric himself, he's basically grabbed by the US military for the purpose of essentially trying to figure out what's going on with these armor hunters. Of course, the idea that the armor hunters showed up, they basically incapacitated the Russians, took over their base. It's a very concerning issue for the US just because of the fact that this base of the Russians was so heavily guarded. And so if the armor hunters were able to just break in, access the information on these various suits that they were developing that were designed to copy the exosuits, then this poses a legitimate threat for the US, because what it means is the armor hunters could break in, to their various bases as well. And so what we end up doing is we basically pick up with, really with Primary Rebo speaking directly to Miro, again, this extraterrestrial organization that's designed to essentially observe various threats outside the planet Earth and to assess whether or not they're a danger to the Earth proper. And what Primary Rebo really says here is, look, you guys have a choice. Either you can hand over whoever it is that's wearing the exosuit and be allowed to live, or we will begin the process of killing you all. And this is kind of funny because what Venditti is basically doing is presenting this scenario of what happens when an overwhelming force approaches the planet Earth and how the governments respond. What will humanity do? In this instance, Primary Rebo provides this insane display of power in order to show humanity what it is that they're dealing with in terms of Primary and the armor hunters being here to collect the exosuit. And because of the fact that the Secretary of Defense, the upper brass in the US government basically say, we are not handing over this suit because it's such a strong weapon. In return, Primary Rebo basically dispatches their ship Ginger to send a demonstration of their power, more or less. And in doing so, what they do is they obliterate the entirety of Mexico City. Now, again, this is kind of crazy. And the reason why is because readers see these kind of scenarios all the time, in the sense that it's like, well, we're not going to give up. We're not going to quit. We're going to fight until the bitter end. But this usually comes from the stance of like superheroes, right? Like Spider-Man will fight until the bitter end. Captain America will fight until the bitter end. When it comes to the military, when it comes to like US governments and so on and so forth, their loyalty is to the people, or at least it should be. And so the idea is that if an overwhelming force appears and basically says, we're going to wipe a city off the map if you do not do what we tell you to do, then the question becomes, do they give in? Does the US military give in? And this presents a scenario where the US military basically prizes weapons over the lives of their citizens, which is kind of ironic because all of it is really just designed for the purpose of maintaining defense. I mean, the advancement of weaponry, the advancement of technology, it's all for like the defense of any one particular territory, any one particular nation. But of what use is the defense of a nation if everyone there is dead? And so that's kind of the irony of the situation as Venditti's giving it to us, because it's really like, these guys, these armor hunters are basically dispatching technology that allows them to wipe cities off the map. What happens if they don't point their guns at Mexico City and they instead point their guns at Washington, DC? What's the government going to do? So because of this, the response, at least from Exo himself, is to basically kind of jump into the fray and find a way to bring these guys down. Now, of course, with the idea that they're trying to secure the armor, there's also some measure of honor in combat among the armor hunters themselves. And what I mean by that is it would be entirely possible for them to just kind of obliterate, cities all over the place and really just kind of cleanse the earth, but they choose not to. And the reason why is because of the fact that the armor hunters also realize that there's a difference between showing a display of force as opposed to just cleansing the entirety of the earth. Why kill billions of people if you don't have to? If they basically wipe out Mexico City and say, this is the kind of destruction that we're capable of, and the US government still says no, well then you simply respond by going in and just taking it, just saying, okay, fine, then we'll take it. We're not going to obliterate the entirety of your planet. We're just going to obliterate you because you're the one that's causing the problem. And so again, they basically dispatch their own hounds down to the surface, which is kind of cool because it shows us that it's a multifaceted effort to basically grab these armors, but it also shows us that these guys in particular, these armor hunters, are experienced in what it is that they're doing. They fought a multitude of different species, a multitude of different governments across a multitude of different worlds. And so they're really prepared for virtually any kind of race and whatever that race is capable of. Now, in terms of humanity's response to this, what this does is basically begin bringing in unity. Now, again, we had talked about unity with regards to really, their first major story arc, and that was really Valiant's version of the Avengers. And in a lot of ways, Unity itself was kind of better than the Avengers, in terms of the team's makeup, in terms of what the different members of the team were capable of. For example, one of the more notable characters and one who will play a pretty major role in the story is Livewire. And Livewire has the ability to basically access any and all communications or technological systems that exist. She literally has the psychic power to access computer systems. That's not a power that you see consistently in comic books, but But in Valiant, this character Livewire is front and center, and it makes her a very potent character for the story, and of course, we'll actually find out why. Now, with regards to Bloodshot, he's really more of Valiant's version of an anti-hero, and you see a lot of those in comic books. That's really just because of the Dark Knight Returns and how that made Batman darker and broodier, and so really what it did is it introduced the idea of anti-heroes being more prominent. With regards to Bloodshot, he's one of these guys where his memory is just constantly wiped. He doesn't really know who he is, doesn't really know what's going on with him, but he has nanites, so he's almost like half machine, half man, insofar that the nanites allow him to heal, but he's also a highly trained mercenary and killer in a lot of different ways. And so again, he's kind of like the Valiant universe weapons expert, like the one guy that you would expect to be the most capable in terms of like combat and weapons use and the whole 9 yards. The fact remains here that these different members of the Unity team have been brought here for the purpose of basically trying to figure out how to respond to the armor hunters themselves. Now, with regards to the actual XO suit, this is when we basically learn the meat and potatoes behind what it is. With this particular guy, Malcolm, this guy that we saw in Prelude to Armor Hunters, the reason why he looks the way he does isn't because it's a different type of armor, of XO suit. It's because of the fact that he's bonding with the suit. The suit is basically taking over him. And that's what we end up learning here. That it's not like, the Valiant equivalent of an Iron Man suit. That's the indication that had always been given to us. That's what seemed to be going on here. Instead, what Venditti does is he kind of yanks the rug out from under us and says, actually, it's not really an Iron Man-like suit. Instead, this suit is sentient. This suit is alive. And basically what happens is it bonds with its host. The idea of it allowing Manowar to gain the abilities that he has and to do the kind of things that he can do is that under normal circumstances, the suit keeps the host protected so that when the transformation process begins, the host will not lose its life. And so the result is that eventually the host, in this circumstance, Malcolm, will begin to become the suit. The suit will basically bond with him on the genetic level. Now, what happens after that, we don't know with any real measure of certainty, but somewhere along the line, those individuals who are bonded with the suit basically become bad guys. They become villains. And that's the motivation behind the armor hunters. From their perspective, the suits are inherently evil. The suits are organic. They're sentient. They take over hosts, and the hosts become corrupted and they become villainous. They raise entire worlds and move on to the next one. The armor hunters are basically stepping up here saying, even if you don't know it, Manowar, the suit is going to bond with you. You're going to become a bad guy. You're going to destroy entire civilizations and cultures. We're here to stop you before that ever becomes the case. Now, what makes things a little bit different with regards to Eric is that the suit is not bonding with him. Now, the indication that's given here by Venditti is that because of the fact that during the Unity storyline, we basically saw Livewire become a host for the Manowar suit and then begin the process of controlling it, that it seems as though she's basically stemmed it away from its normal role of taking over hosts, and instead, it's now just a suit that can be worn by a person. And so because of that, it really seems as though the idea of the suit corrupting and taking over Manowar is no longer the case anymore. And so because of the fact that these various organisms have been dispatched by the armor hunters, they've been attacking various cities all over the world, ideally, the cities that Manowar has visited, what this is really just kind of like a call to arms from everyone. Now, of course, this takes a particular toll on Eric, and the reason why is because of the fact that his, temporary home, where the Visigoths were allowed to set up residence until they can actually find, a tried and true nation for themselves, a lot of their number are basically attacked and reduced to the point of almost near extinction. Now, of course, this is really Robert Venditti kind of coming along and saying, look, the Visigoths have just kind of been living in people's backyards for a while. They've been house guests for quite some time. It's basically time to thin their herd, to reduce their number down so that we can basically have kind of like a fresh start for Eric of Dacia and his wife/girlfriend, Sana. And so because of that, with it really only being the two of them left, they can now just kind of go forward and set up a life for themselves. So again, the fact remains here, with this attack coming from the armor hunters themselves, the question becomes, can humanity respond adequately? Can humanity come up with a plan of their own in order to basically save themselves as well as, fend off against the armor hunters? Now, the funny thing about this is that all these different attacks that are coming from the armor hunters are really just classic forms of warfare, right? It's a classic way to defeat your enemy. You can do it in a couple different ways. There is a war of attrition where you just keep sending an insane amount of numbers. You can capitalize on the weaknesses of your existing enemy. I mean, all that stuff is classic warfare, Sun Tzu, Art of War, different things like that. And you see it play out in almost every form of media where war takes place. You see that kind of scenario, you see this scenario playing out time and time again. Go into cities, conquer those cities, weaken humanity, force them to fight a war on two fronts, battle the enemy while taking care of their sick, stretch their numbers out. It's a classic example of conflict, a classic example of how to wage a war. And so because of everything that's happened, because of the fact that so many of his own people have died, despite all his best efforts and all the things that he's gone through to keep them alive, Eric effectively abandons his role as Exo-Man of War. He simply walks away from the suit. And so because of this, Colonel Capshaw, kind of like the military liaison that Exo-Man of War previously worked with, the decision is made that if Eric is going to give up the Exo suit, that's fine, but the conflict is going to be fought on her terms. Now, this is absolute genius, and I love the way that Robert Venditti did this because of the fact that humanity is just experiencing these crushing blows and these crushing defeats in all these different cities. Ultimately, the indication is given here that humanity just gives up. They literally say, okay, fine. Like Capshaw tells Primary Rebo, look, we quit. You've crushed us too far. We cannot stand against the forces that you have at your disposal, that you have at your command. We're sending in the suit of armor. You can have the suit, do with it as you want to. What we end up learning is that inside this suit is Livewire. Now, again, this is awesome because remember, they're in Ginger, and Ginger is just this giant mechanized suit. It's a mechanized, computerized suit. Livewire controls computers. Livewire takes control of Ginger. And it's the coolest thing because what she immediately does is just say, okay, fine, we're just gonna crash this thing. Like we're gonna set it on self-destruct and we're gonna crash this thing into the ground. We're gonna bring it crashing down around everybody. And that's exactly what initially happens. The problem with this is that, I guess the best way I can put it, relative mass to the length of a fall. Let's say for example, you just fell backwards and you hit the ground. It would hurt, but you probably wouldn't die. Even if you hit your head, you probably wouldn't die. I mean, you might have some brain damage depending on how hard your brain hits your head. But if I drop you from 500 feet, you'll die. Like you will hit the ground and you will die. With this whole idea of Ginger, it's the same way. Ginger falling from the altitude that it was at relative to its size, how durable it is, how strong it is, hitting the ground wasn't necessarily like falling, 500 feet, but it was certainly like falling 7 feet. And so it does some damage to the suit, but it doesn't destroy it in its entirety. And so because of that, it basically initiates a hard reboot and begins the process of carrying out the orders of Primary Rebo to just obliterate everything around it. Now, again, the cool thing about this is that Primary Rebo is pulling no punches. And the reason why he's pulling no punches here is because of the fact that he's tired of being an armor hunter. And that's one of the cool things that we're given about his character. We're not given a lot of character development with these guys. We're given some, but the character development that we are given, especially with Primary Rebo, is that he is tired of being an armor hunter. He's tired of the Great Hunt. He wants to finish this, he wants to call it a day, and he wants to leave. Not only that, this mission is a little personal than we would expect it to be. And the reason why is because of the fact that Malcolm was one of their own. And so even if it's only for the purpose of killing him and then retrieving his body and giving him an honorable burial, Rebo wants to see this whole mission through. Now, this is the cool thing because the Unity team are pushed to the absolute limit. Under normal circumstances, we would say, well, then we'll just have, Livewire access Ginger and then try the entire system all over again. Instead, what's happening here is that, you basically have Ginger forming a shield around itself, and then it's also got these small probes that are just racing through, destroying everything in sight. And so because of the fact that these are computerized probes, and because of the fact that Livewire is trying to access them, they don't have a hive mind. They all function with their own enclosed systems. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that this is yet another example of Venditti showing us how the armor hunters are prepared for virtually everything. I wouldn't go as far as to say that the armor hunters had designed these, small little probes for the purpose of just avoiding someone like Livewire, who's a technopath and can access any and all forms of technology using her mind, but the purpose is still served and the purpose still works. Ultimately, it keeps, Livewire from being able to function in her full capacity, and the result is that humanity is just kind of left to do what they can when they can and evacuate as many places as they can. And so ultimately what ends up happening here is we have Eric redon his exo armor and basically say, look, if this is what it takes in order to pull this off, if this is what it takes is me just killing this guy, kind of stepping up, playing the role of the hero one more time, that's exactly what he does. And so it's really kind of like it's a very heroic scenario for Exo. It's a very heroic instance of his character just kind of jumping in, taking on the role that he's meant to be and being a hero. And so ultimately this leads to a direct physical conflict between Primary Rebo and Eric, and kind of like this last battle to determine the fate of the planet Earth. So it's really kind of cool. Now, what this does is this brings into sharp relief the nature of the armor hunters in terms of how they kill individuals who have the exosuits. And the reason why is because of the fact that the exosuits are virtually indestructible when it comes to traditional arms, when it comes to like conventional warfare of any kind. What the armor hunters do is they use spears that basically disrupt the connection between the host and the suit itself. And because this connection is disrupted, it's basically like grabbing another spear and then killing the host. So they don't really kill the suit. The suit can't literally be destroyed. All you can do is kill the host that the suit's using to replicate itself. And because of the fact that the suit can't replicate dead tissue, because it can't feed on dead tissue and duplicate that, ultimately what ends up happening is the suit just kind of sits there and just waits for somebody else to come along and somebody else to access it. Now, what they usually end up doing is they usually end up just kind of like grabbing the suit and then taking the suit, putting it in containment and calling it a day so nobody else can access it. But ultimately, the entirety of the armor hunters are basically defeated by the forces of Unity. So of course, again, it's one of these things where Unity effectively saves the day. But again, what this does is it's more or less kind of like a soft reboot for the character of Exo Manowar. And that's usually what happens. You usually give us kind of, Valiant will give us these smaller stories that'll be designed to kind of reshuffle things and set the stage for the next line of storytelling. Really, the role of this was to give us an idea of what the exosuit actually is. It was to tell us what the exosuit is actually like, what its purpose is, what its form and function is, and what it actually does. The other half of this was to reduce the number of Visigoths so that there was really only Exo, Eric of Dacia and his wife Sana, and that was really it. And so again, it kind of gives us this idea that in the future going forward, there'll be more emphasis on Eric himself, more emphasis on the exosuit, more emphasis on his role as a hero, as well as what role he'll play in Unity as part of the Valiant universe. But with that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.